Hello, my brothers and sisters, and welcome to Off the Beaten Path, the paranormal show where we talk about paranormal events in history as well as in modern day times. I'm your host, as always, Reverend Hagen, and I'd like to thank dngnradio.com, The Dungeon, for picking up our little show here. We're very excited to be a part of the DNGN family. And that being said, let's get right into werewolves. Werewolves are what we're talking about today. Very exciting. Personally, my favorite character in horror is the werewolf. My 13-year-old son asked me before I started recording this, well, if you could be any creature, though, any mythological creature from the movies, what would you be? And I did pick werewolf, and I'll tell you why. Because all the other ones, you're permanently that creature, right? Even when we did a show on Bigfoot a while back, the people in Europe that believed that these hairy creatures that they had seen were actually people who had gone out and lived in the wild and then became bestial, grew hair and fangs. But there was no going back. Once you changed, you permanently changed. Not the case with werewolves. With werewolves, you can change into a werewolf, you change back. In some stories, it's the moon. In other stories, it's your own free will. I just think werewolves are the coolest thing out there. That being said, I got to give you a little historical perspective here on some of the old cases that we're going to be looking at. Most of them are in the 16th and 17th centuries, in other words, the 1500s and the 1600s. And it's important to remember that during that time was the time of the Inquisitions, was the time of what pagans and Wiccans call the burning times in Europe. These were all sparked off by a document called the Malleus Maleficarum. I know that's a mouthful. By, and get this, Heinrich Inquisitorius Kramer. Hello. Sounds like a Bond villain. And yet he wrote this document that was held as sacrosanct in accusing witches of witchcraft. In it was basically the how-to guide of identifying signs of witchcraft, identifying a witch, torturing a witch, and killing a witch. The crazy thing about the hysteria of this time is that almost universally, if you were accused of witchcraft or of worshiping the devil or of being a werewolf or consorting with demons, the whole nine yards, it was a done deal. Once you got that pronouncement, very few people were actually acquitted of their crimes. Because we know, both historically and in modern day times, if you torture somebody long enough, they're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear. It's a terrible way to get information. And yet, for over 100 years, this was the document that did that. I know I'm digressing a little bit here, but it's really important to get the mindset of the time during this period, during the 16th and 1700s. So we're going to start. We're going to start with some historical cases. The first one being the Werewolf of Bedburg. The werewolf, that's kind of hard to say, the Werewolf of Bedburg. But anyway, during the 16th century, in the town of Bedburg, which is now Rhineland, there were a plague of cases where both cattle and human beings were found mutilated in the forests and in the surrounding countryside. Finally, in 1589, the townspeople, the people in charge, were tracking this giant wolf that they believed was the culprit. Turned out not to be a wolf at all once they caught up with him, interestingly enough. It was a guy named Peter Strump. He was a local farmer. Now, he confessed to killing. This is just totally disturbing to me. Confessed to killing and eating 14 children. And he claimed he could transform into a wolf. And sorry for my squeamishness here, but there's something about kids being hurt, even in the movies, that just really sends me, packing. But regardless, that was his claim. That was his confession, that he killed and ate 14 children, and that he could transform into a wolf. He was sentenced to death, and what they did is they hung this guy on a pike in the town as you came into town, and right next to him there was another pike with the body of a wolf on it as a warning that they're not down with werewolves in their town. It seems a little overkill to me. I think that's kind of goes without saying, but they were all about it. What's really interesting about this case too is that modern day psychologists look at this as a case of clinical lycanthropy. Now, clinical lycanthropy is different from regular lycanthropy. Regular lycanthropy is the mystical ability to literally transform into a wolf. Clinical lycanthropy, and I'm going to read this for you, is defined as a rare psychiatric syndrome that involves a delusion that the affected person can transform into, has transformed into, or is a non-human animal. So, the clinical lycanthropy is somebody with a delusion that this is happening. An actual lycanthropy is where somebody literally transforms into a wolf. Okay, I got to check something real quick here, and we're back on. So, the next case we're going to look at is Manuel Romasanta. Manuel Romasanta. He was a 54-year-old guy, considered Spain's first documented serial killer. Now get this. This guy worked as a tailor. And he was between 4'6" and 4'11" feet tall. Wasn't even 5 foot tall. Teeny little guy. Well, his wife died in 1833, and he became a traveling salesman. All around Spain and Portugal. During this time, rumors started circulating that he was killing people and pawning their possessions for money, and then selling soap made from the victim's human fat. Zoink. So this is a pretty organized werewolf. He was arrested in 1853 for the murder of 13 people. And his defense, he claimed to be a victim of lycanthropy. Of course, the curse that turns him into a wolf. In the end, he was acquitted of 4 murders, but really strangely, to me anyway, that the victims had signs of actual wolf attacks, of real wolf attacks on them. So that one's kind of wild to me, that it wasn't just human beings mauling these people, a human mauling these people, but signs of an actual wolf. You decide. There's also the werewolf of Ansbach. In 1685, a large, vicious wolf was terrorizing and killing people in the Principality of Ansbach, which is now Germany. When the wolf was killed, the people dressed him. Oh, get this. This is the deal. This guy, they actually thought that it was the wolf was not a wolf. It was a werewolf who was actually the dead mayor, the mayor who had passed away a few years back. When the wolf was finally killed, this huge wolf that had been terrorizing the town, they dressed him as the mayor and put a mask on him and hung him in the town square, where he hung for years, and then they ended up putting his body in a museum. Absolutely wild. The werewolf of Chalons. In the 1500s in Paris, France, an unnamed tailor lured children into his shop, dismembering them and eating them. What is with these guys eating kids? When he couldn't find victims that way, he would supposedly dress up as a wolf and killed several people out in the countryside that way. As more children disappeared, the tailor became a suspect. So when they invaded his shop, they found this huge cask full of the remains of a bunch of kids. Good night. The tailor was sentenced to burn at the stakes, which was customary for witches and werewolves and other supernatural creatures at the time. Thank you, Malleus Maleficarum, that we mentioned earlier. All right, now we have the Livonian werewolf, which is, Livonia is modern-day Latvia. This is really interesting. This guy claimed to be a hound of God. In other words, his story was that he and other werewolves, other hounds of God, killed people, but they weren't people, they were witches, throughout the countryside. As per God's order. He even said that they went into hell to pursue some of these witches. So what did this guy get charged with? Not murder, my friends. He got charged with turning people away from Christianity, of all things. He was sentenced to both be flogged and banished for life. Wild. So while he confessed to killing people, they weren't really people, they were witches. And so his only charge was turning people away from Christianity. strange times, and people say we got it hard. Come on, people. There's also the werewolf of Pavia. And let's get it straight here. In 1541 in Pavia, Italy, an unnamed farmer supposedly attacked and killed many men in the open country. After many hunts to try to catch this guy, he was caught, and he told his captors that he suffered from lycanthropy, right? That he was a werewolf. But his hair grew inwardly instead of outwardly. That was the only difference between him and other werewolves and other wolves. So to test this, to test this theory out, they cut this guy's arms and legs off to see if it's true, to see if his hair is growing inside. And incredibly, he died from the operations. Hello. And they never found any hair growing inside of him. So maybe he was just a crazy person. And then there's a really famous case. It's Jean Grenier in 1603 in a bunch of villages in the southwestern parts of France. Children were mysteriously disappearing. A baby was even reported being taken from its crib or from its cradle. A 13-year-old girl, Marguerite Poirier, there's two different stories about this. In one, she swore that in the full moon she'd been attacked by a savage beast that resembled a wolf. In another telling of this story, a 13, 14-year-old shepherd that she used to hang out with, or boy that she used to hang out with while she was shepherding her sheep or her livestock, confessed to her that he could turn into a wolf and that he had eaten several children. So what she did was, or to prove it to her, he supposedly transformed into this beast on two legs that looked just like a wolf and attacked her. They arrested this guy. The wolf was, in fact, his name was Jean Grenier, a 14-year-old boy. And he confessed. He said, yeah, I've killed dozens of children. He was immediately arrested and brought to trial, admitting he was a werewolf. In the later telling of this tale, where he showed this girl who he was not killed. He was put in a monastery. They really believed that this guy was evil, and the Inquisitor, years later, something like 20 years later, could have been 10, I don't know, went to visit this guy to see how he was. And they said he never spoke. He was almost feral, very leery of people. But nobody had died in the monastery, so who knows? But he was. There was something about this kid that was really off. And then another story, and I know I'm going crazy here, so I'm gonna cut the historical stuff short in a bit here. In 1570s, a hermit who lived outside a village. He'd been a hermit for years. So he marries this woman, and he doesn't know how to really provide for more than himself. So during this period, a bunch of kids were disappearing, and worse, they were found. A lot of bodies were found mutilated in the jungle. Authorities believed it was a werewolf. This is this period in history, and so they started hunting it. And not only that, they told the townspeople, the powers that be told the townspeople, this is a werewolf. Keep your eyes open and let's hunt this thing down. Let's kill this thing. A group of hunters came across what they believed was a wolf hunched over a body, and it turned out to be this hermit. On trial, he confessed that a ghost or a demon, he wasn't sure, had given him this oil that transformed him into a wolf, and that he had killed a bunch of kids. After he knocked them down, he would rend tear into their flesh with his wolf teeth, even bringing meat home for his wife. After he did this, so she would have something to eat. Just wild. He was found guilty and was sentenced to be burned at the stake, which he was, which is pretty common. This seems to be how they're taking care of this. You'll notice that there's no kill the first wolf in the lineage thing, which is really popular in a werewolf. There's no silver involved in any of this. Back in the day, this is how you took care of werewolves. Claudia Gaylord. Now, this is a female that was accused of being a witch. Or, I'm sorry, accused of being a werewolf. Hello, a little out of control here. Claudia Gaylord, also known as the Werewolf of Burgundy. So, that's werewolves historically. And now that's just a sampling. I could literally go on and on and on and on and on about different cases of werewolves. But I wanted to hit on two different cases, and I'm not going to use real names or sources on this, actually, because these I believe are true stories. One was of a family. This is in West Virginia, who was camping. Now, this was actually as part of a show on Sci-Fi. That when I first heard about this case, but actually got to dive into it a little bit. This family who had rented a cabin, they were hunters. They had done this yearly. Were out hunting out on a hunting trip, and what happened is they started seeing lights in the forest. These really bright lights in the forest. Their first night there. The dad and the son, because they're out in the middle of nowhere, mind you, decide to go check out what's going on. So they grab their guns and their flashlights, and they try to track down this light. As they start hearing noises around them in the forest. The dad, who had been hunting for almost 20 years, realizes that they're being hunted, that something hinky is going on here. But that feeling of being prey that he was not accustomed to was very prevalent for him. His son was just, pardon my expression, scared shitless. So they went back home. They never found the source of the light. But in the light of day, when they were retracing their steps, they found this huge hole, almost like a warren, under a tree. Now, this wasn't just the family. It wasn't the family that went out. This was the son and his girlfriend. Might have even been his fiance, but I'm pretty sure it was just his girlfriend at the time. They find this den, this huge den, underneath a tree of all places. And what they end up doing is he wants to go in and take a look. And his girlfriend says, no, you're out of your mind. I'm not letting you go in there. But as he got closer, he felt a strange pull. He felt compelled to go in here, but terrified at the same time. So they didn't go in. Over the next 2 nights, but especially the last night, they see what could only be described as werewolves, as 6 to 10 of these werewolves in the yard, moving around. They are absolutely terrified. Now, one of them is a seasoned hunter who'd been hunting those woods, like I said, for 20 years. So for him to mistake it, because a lot of people say, well, it was probably just a bear or, a big cat, something like that. No, this guy knows what he's talking about when it comes to these woods. So and that always bothers me, that somebody will say, well, this hunter who's been hunting for 20 years, I'm sure he had no idea what he was talking about. He did, actually. And he claimed that they were wolves standing upright. It was a harrowing night for the family. They ended up leaving the next day. So it wasn't 2 days. They ended up leaving the next day. But because as the house was being attacked, the sun came up, basically in a nutshell, and the wolves disappeared. This particular case, if you believe in the paranormal, if you believe in cryptoid stuff, and I know most people don't, I find the witnesses amazingly credible. They were terrified in interviews, telling their story. They were the real deal, as far as I'm concerned. Maybe it wasn't werewolves, but they got up close and personal in their encounters with these things, like being trapped in a light outside, in the area of the light outside. They're trapped, and right outside the light are these werewolves. And to think that these people that had been hunting for years wouldn't know a werewolf from a bear, and since bears don't hunt in packs, I think we can give this one credence. The other story, is of a guy 2 years out of the military, his young military wife, move again. This time wasn't West Virginia, but in the hills of Virginia. And the wife, he works at night. The wife keeps seeing something in her window and hearing something outside, and she's absolutely terrified. When the husband comes home, he kind of stereotypically thinks his wife is being hysterical. He doesn't really believe it. When he comes home the next night and she is petrified. He really believes something is out there. So he goes and looks, and he finds tracks, huge wolf tracks, outside his house. Now, even though this was a younger guy who had just finished serving his country, he grew up in this area. So, again, I really believe that people that grow up in a certain area or are indigenous to that area are going to know the difference between bear tracks, wolf tracks, and that kind of thing. I think they just are, especially if they've grown up going out into the woods like that. But I digress. The next night, he hears it himself, takes his gun, and takes off to try to follow this thing. And he can't. He loses it in about 200 yards. The next morning, he calls his buddy, and they track it down. This is kind of a long story. Bear with me, though. They track it down to this shack out in the middle of nowhere. Kind of a hunting shack. That in and of itself isn't that unusual for that part of the country or areas of the forest where people hunt. There's often little hunting cabins that they've built out there to hang out in while they're hunting. So when they open the door, they find it's been divided in two. One is a very small living quarters. When they open this reinforced door on the other side, they see a room that is basically just two shackles coming out of the wall to hold somebody or something in there, and claws all over the place, claws on the door, on the walls, as far as the chains will reach. They call the sheriff, and who comes out, amazingly. They take him out there, and he said, "You guys were trespassing, and you have no right to go in there, and leave this alone. This has nothing to do with you." They later find out that the guy that owns the place works at a tire shop in town, right? And once they go to that tire shop to scope it out, I mean, they're into this investigation, right? These are just two schmoes, right, from the town. The guy sees him and he bolts, and nobody heard from him again, pretty much, which I find fascinating. It turns out, looking at the property itself, is that it was owned by a man who had lost his wife, who had one son, who was a troubled kid, the kid that worked in the tire store. And who knows, maybe he was just some sadistic guy that chained his son up and his son went banana balls. But the claw marks and the destruction within that second room were amazing. So for me, those are just two credible cases of lycanthropy. Now, you might not come to the same conclusion I am, and I welcome you not to. Please, in the comments below, let me know. Hey, you're full of poop. You're crazy. You're a crazy person. Or tell me, God, I believe with you. Or leave a story that you know of lycanthropy. I was first fascinated by werewolves in the first movie I saw, Curse of the Werewolf, with Lon Chaney Jr. as the werewolf. And, it had the gypsy curse and had a steel cane or a silver cane. That was the only way to kill the werewolf, and watching his transformation. Oh my God, that's so cool. But werewolves have been part of popular culture for so long now. On Scooby-Doo, for goodness sake, right? You've got Good Night, An American Werewolf in London. You've got American Werewolf in Paris, for goodness sake. I was a teenage werewolf back in the day. One werewolf story after another. Underworld, the Underworld series. That's hugely popular. You've got werewolves that change by the moon. The movie Wolf with Jack Nicholson and Michelle Pfeiffer. You've also got Wolves. That was not a big hit, but was another werewolf story. So werewolves have been with us, at least in pop culture, for a really, really long time. Do I believe werewolves are real? I didn't for a long time. I thought would be super cool, but I think it's kind of silly. Until those two cases, and until I dove into those two cases. And for me, if one is credible, if there's one credible case out there, that really opens the door. It's like anything with the paranormal or the mystic. If, let's take UFOs. Out of the 30,000 sightings of UFOs annually worldwide, that's 30,000 a year worldwide reported. let's say 1% of those are real, which is 1%. Good night. Or are unexplained. I mean, doesn't that make it real? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, you can say, oh, it was Venus, it was swamp gas, whatever. Bigfoot's the same way. Let's say one of them is real. Werewolves the same way. Just one case is real. That opens the door, because that's just one case that's been investigated and found credible. And for me, those two cases are very credible. And I have close to 30 years experience looking at the paranormal, and over 20 in active field work, not just reading books, not just studying, but going out in the field and studying these things. Again, where Angels Fear to Tread is our paranormal group. You can find us on Facebook. We have dealt with never really any cryptoid cases for the most part. At least our group hasn't. But we've only been around for about 10 years or so. I personally have been investigating for a very long time. But we've run into stuff that, as far as I'm concerned, is credible, of non-human entities, of demons, call them what you want, of a literal demon with a sigil on its forehead, the whole 9 yards, that denoted who he was or who it was. The paranormal is really fascinating, but it's also a wild rabbit hole that once you go down that rabbit hole, man, it gets weird, especially when you get into UFOs or cryptoids like this, or just classic monsters. The theories and the conspiracy theories that have followed with some of this stuff, absolutely wild. And we're actually going to get more involved in those in later cases. Some of the wild conspiracy theories that are out there involving specifically the paranormal. And I'm not just talking about UFO cover-ups. I'm talking about giants. The cover-up of giants. Did they live on the land? And if they did, why doesn't the man want us to know about it? I know that sounds ridiculous and very Breitbart-y, for lack of a better term. Gotcha. But really seems to be the case. So that's it for us here on Off the Beaten Path when it comes to werewolves. Again, I did not believe in them until those two cases, and actually I think it's pretty credible now. Please be sure to check out dngnradio.com, The Dungeon. As always, please like and please comment. I'd really like to hear your feedback on these shows. So like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. The subscriptions and the comments and the likes, they're kind of our bread and butter here. And I hate to make please like that, but share this with as many people that you think would enjoy it, please. And as always, my brothers and sisters, you keep those heads up. Have a great day from us here at Off the Beaten Path.